Amen. You just said exposits. I didn't even know you could make a verb out of that. That was awesome. Got to give you a little bit of a hard time there. Hey, we are in a great series called The Greatest Adventure, and I hope that your family has one of these. And I hope you got a sticker last week because that means you were here. And I hope you'll get one this week, and I've already got mine because I've been here once already. This is my second. I'm not going to get a second sticker, though, just one sticker, okay? So we're... Hey, and if you like to take notes, Pastor Pete has made your day. You can go find one of these, and it's got all the fill-in-the-blanks. They're also probably available online, although I'm saying that ex cathedra. I'm not really sure if that's true or not, but I know there's some copies out there where this is a 9-week series talking about really kind of the life of Moses and the way that God has called him and used him. And then, as bold as it may sound, comparing yourself to that God would call and use you. In fact, we're talking about God's call today. God's going to call Moses out for something very specific, very special, and Moses eventually is going to be obedient to that. And so the real question for us at the end of this will be, well, how do we know what God is calling us to do? I mean, you know, the easy out is for you to go, well, that was Moses. I get that. But the message today is that God continues to call his people. So if you remember at the end of last week, the people of God had been in Egypt for a long time and things had gone really sour for them. In fact, chapter 2 ends like this. During those days, the king of Egypt died. The people of Israel groaned because of their slavery. They cried out to help. Remember, Moses was born in the midst of all that. He should have been killed. It was a genocide, but he was miraculously spared because God was looking out for him. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and then these amazing verbs. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So some of you are in here today, and you're suffering. I mean, you've been through the ringer. I just want you to hear that God knows. That he hasn't ignored any of that, that there's not a bit of that he hasn't noticed. And in the midst of all that, God is going to call out to Moses. If you remember, Moses was raised in the Egyptian palace. Miraculously, he gets to skip all the slavery stuff, and he's like literally with the silver spoon in his mouth kind of thing. But after 40 years of that, he goes out and he does the wrong thing in the wrong way. Instead of maybe doing it God's way, he goes out and says, let's just murder this guy. And so, he's on the run. So he's been on the run now in the wilderness for 40 more years. So first of all, Moses is 80. So for those of you that, said, hey, man, I took my early retirement, 62 and a half, I'm done. Maybe with something, but not with God, for sure, okay? Because God specializes in calling people who don't think they've got anything left, and Moses was one of these. So I'm going to read out of Exodus chapter 3, which is our main text for today. Let me read the first 10 verses here. It says, Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness, came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses said, Here I am. Then God said, Do not come near, take off your sandals, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And God said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of, and then there's this long list of peoples who live in the promised land. Still a conflict today. Verse 9. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Verse 10. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Now, it's one thing to hear that God is concerned, that God knows about what's going on in your life. Moses is hearing these things. It's a whole different thing, and this is where, Moses, you can almost see him listening very attentively. Oh, this is sounding great. Keep going. Tell me more. Tell me more. And now I'm sending you, Moses. Okay, now, big semicolon right there, right? Because Moses is going, wait a minute, I mean, somebody wrote a book that says, Here am I, send Aaron. That's the name of the book. Here am I, send Aaron. We all want to be part of the solution. We just don't want to be the solution, right? Listen to Moses. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? God said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I've sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this very mountain. Verse 13, Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? What shall I say to them? Verse 14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So, Moses, he hasn't even begun to make excuses yet. So if you guys are preparing your excuses, just hang on. Moses has some pretty good ones, but he's not even really begun. But, it's a pretty decent question. Like, hey, I'm going to go and do this big thing, but your own people don't even know your name. What am I going to tell them? He says, tell them that I am sent you. Of course, I am's a big deal. I mean, the name Yahweh or Jehovah, we don't even know really exactly how to transliterate this Hebrew 4-consonant name. I say Yahweh, it's the easiest one for me, but Jesus makes a big deal about this when Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, God in the flesh, when he's on the earth, he begins to say these I am statements to the people around him. John records in the Gospel of John 7 mega I am statements. In fact, John's book in some ways is organized around these 7 statements Jesus makes. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of heaven. I am the good shepherd. And there's 7 of these. All the way to I'm the resurrection and the life. So, and the people listening to Jesus, you know what they did? They took up stones because they're like, man, who do you think you are? You're like acting like you're a God. And Jesus said, I am. Big deal. What's your name, God? My name is, I'm the God who always is. I was, I is, I am to come, but I'm the always existing one. Well, this is still not enough for Moses, okay? As it's not enough for a lot of you in here. I'm God, that guy. That's the guy who's telling you to go. So verse 19, we'll skip down to there. It says, but I know, God says, that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you will not go away empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. So God is telling Moses exactly what's going to happen. He doesn't give him every detail, but he says, I'm calling you. My people have been enslaved 400 years, and they've been groaning, and I hear it, and I understand. I really get it, and I'm sending you. And Moses is like, whoa, time out here, just a second. Me? Who am I? And who are you for that matter? And God begins to answer some of these things, and he says, this is how it's going to go. It's not going to be easy. I'm going to have to do some big stuff, and only after that will they let you go. And then they won't just let you go. They're going to throw everything at you to get you out of there. You guys are going to plunder Egypt. All 400 years of slavery where you had to work for free and they got rich off of your labor, you're going to leave, and you're going to be the rich ones. And they're going to be so happy to see you go. This is still not enough for Moses. We might have a few Moseses in here, right? I mean, he begins to go back and forth. And in the back and forth, the thing that I really enjoy about chapter 3 and chapter 4 is how patient God is with Moses. Because in here, if we could just stand in a line and everyone get interviewed, there's a lot of us that God has spoken to. And you know what we've said? Hold on. And we've got excuses and we've got questions and, we're just, And there's a lot of us that are still going back and forth with God on stuff. And God goes back and forth with Moses on all sorts of stuff. I mean, at the end of, like I can't speak well, and, my knees shake when I get in front of people, all that, I'm 80, God, I'm 80, kind of thing. At the end of all this, in chapter 4, verse 13, this is what Moses finally says. This is Moses' heart. Oh, my Lord, please send somebody else. That's his heart. After God's reassured him of all these things. And don't you feel like that sometimes? Don't raise your hand. Just agree mentally. Yes. After all my excuses and God still gives me an answer, I still feel like, God, just let it be somebody else. Verse 14, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, isn't there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he'll be glad. Now, God is God after all. Moses lives in Midian in the wilderness. Egypt is a long way off, but God sees everything as if it's all there. And he knows that Aaron is already on his way to see Moses. He's like, hey, he's coming, he'll be here tomorrow about lunch. You better fix double for lunch because Aaron's going to be here, and he's going to be happy to see you. So here's the plan. Verse 15, you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth. I'll be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand the staff with which you shall do the sign. So, the plan is, you've made all these excuses, so let's include Aaron too. So, in Aaron, you don't have to do it all by yourself, and Aaron's going to be there. But you listen to me. You tell Aaron, and then Aaron will be the one, because his knees don't shake when he gets in front of me. He can tell all of the people, and this is how it's going to go. And don't you know that Moses said, oh, God, there's got to be some other plan, just not me. But that's the end of it for Moses. Verse 18, Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and he said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said, go in peace. So the thing you need to hear after all of this, and you ought to go read it for yourself, is that Moses goes. That God calls Moses, and Moses goes. We might say Moses goes eventually. We might say Moses goes after some discussion. We might say Moses goes after the back and forth, back. At least 5 different times, as I read it this past week. At least five different times. Now listen, I got 3 kids. And when I say clean your room, and they don't, the first time it's not so bad. I'm sorry, I might have said it in Spanish. I thought I said it in English. I thought I said clean your room. Oh, yeah. And the second time I go, your irritation goes up, right? I don't even know that I've gotten to a 5th time without blowing my top. You know what I'm saying? Moses, basically, his response is, no. No. And a lot of us are in here thinking, well, Wayne's going to talk about God's call, and I guarantee if God were to call me, just hold on a minute. And Moses was one of the better ones of everybody, right? And his answer basically is, no way, Jose, kind of thing, right? I'm not going. Eventually, he does go. Yes, he does go. So I want to do some fill in the blank with you guys about some things that I think we can learn from Moses and his back and forth with God. I think there's 13. I try to count these, and I say that so that I make sure that I get them all. And if I don't get them all, you don't have to pop up and just ask me afterwards. I mean, I'm trying my best here, right, kind of thing. So, but first of all, does God call us? I mean, so this was Moses, but now we're in 2022, which is very hard to say, but we're in 2022. Does God call us? And the answer is going to be yes and yes. Yes, generally, and yes, specifically. So let me begin with the general. Generally speaking, yes, God has a call on your life. That's the fill in the blank. God has a call on your life. Some of you are interested. Some of you are like, I don't really think so. Well, just stick with me. God has a call on your life. I mean, Moses is minding his own business, but God calls to him, and he calls him by name. There's something about when God gets a hold of us personally. Many, many times in the Bible, God calls people by name. The one that I'm thinking of mostly right now is when, after Jesus has been raised from the dead and nobody really is believing it, and Mary Magdalene is there in the garden with him and doesn't recognize him because I guess he looked not like the Jesus she was expecting, but she recognized it was him when he says her name. He says, Mary. And then she knows. God knows your name. God does have a call on your life. He calls Moses by name. He calls many other people in the Bible by name, and God knows your name. Here's another fill in the blank. God revealed himself to Moses, and God will reveal himself to you. Moses says, well, who are you? He says, I am that I am. I will be that who I will be. I am the self-existing God. There's no one like me. I'm different than everyone, this kind of thing. And Moses is going to learn all sorts of stuff about God. He's going to learn that God is a compassionate God. God is an amazingly grace-filled God. But God is also holy. God demands that we live lives that are in line with his holiness. Moses is going to learn all of these things about God in the next 40 years. God revealed himself to Moses. God will reveal himself to you. He doesn't just call you and not give you some more information. If you say yes to God, you are going to learn all sorts of things about God that you do not know today. First, here's some just part of the general call of God. God calls all of us first to salvation. Now, in a group like this, there's certainly people in here who have not said yes to Jesus Christ. They've said, I hear, that I'm a sinner. Maybe I don't have a problem with that. Maybe I do. But I don't know how somebody who died a long way away, a long time ago, how his death could somehow make me right with God. This is what Christianity absolutely teaches, that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life, that our path to forgiveness, our path to relationship with God, the great I am, is only through Jesus Christ. And what this says is that being good at church is not good enough. And I say that to you who are here. You're doing great today. Right here you are. It's a cold day. The wind blew you in here, and you were praying there was coffee, and there was, So, wow. But I want you to hear that being good at church is not what it's about. The salvation is through Christ and Christ alone. So, first of all, God calls all of us to salvation. I was a 19-year-old freshman at Baylor University. If you know me much, I love to tell this story because I could sing the old hymn. I love to tell the story. You know why? Because how radically my life has been changed by Jesus. It's been so amazingly radical in my life. I was 19 years old. I don't know what your story is, but I know this. God is calling you to have your own story. So you think about that. Here's another thing in the general. God will continue to call to you throughout your life. There's always this invitation to more. In fact, we were singing the songs. I'll tell Mackenzie this in staff this week, but I was like, I don't even know that song. When I sing a song that I don't know, I'm like negative about that. That's a negative comment. I don't even know that song. Then about halfway through, I'm like, well, this is a pretty good song. There's something more here. God is continually calling us to something more. He's saying, follow me here. Trust me in this. You haven't been this way before. And that's true for all of us these days. That's my first pandemic, God has a general call to all his people. The first thing that Moses was called to do, I don't know if you caught it in the story, what's the first thing that God says for Moses? He says, take off your sandals. You are to worship. You, Moses, you are in the presence of the divine. God has this general call to all his people that we are to worship, that we are to do things like Sabbath. And you're like, oh, I'm terrible at Sabbath. Well, fix it. The general call to rest and to worship, that's never been, revoked. God has a general call to all of his people for these kind of things. And then there are certain spiritual practices that God calls all of us to. All Christ followers, all God followers are called to certain things like prayer. Did you need to be reminded that day that you are called in a very consistent and daily, many, many times a day way to be in communion with God through some sort of conversation? Inside your head, outside your mouth, it doesn't really matter how it happens. We are all called to know God's Word. You don't know if I spent any time in God's Word today. Preaching doesn't count. I can tell you that. They tell you that in seminary, like, hey, preaching doesn't count. Okay. We're all called to know God's Word. We're all called to serve someplace. We're all called to give finances. We're called to give time. We're all called to share our faith. Oh, I thought that was for an evangelist. Well, they're just probably better at it than the rest of us, but we're all called to share our faith. It's the general call, right? Certain spiritual practices. So before we end this one, you might go home and meditate a little bit and say, Am I faithful in the general spiritual practices that all of God's people are called to? I will say this, Moses, as far as we can tell, was a faithful guy. You know, he was a faithful husband. He was a faithful father. He was faithful son-in-law to Jethro. He was a faithful shepherd. He showed up and he did his job. There's a lot of value in showing up and doing your job. A lot of us want to receive the great call of God, except you may not after today. You may be so scared after today, but a lot of us want the great call. God, I want to be the quarterback. I'll kick the field goal on the game-winning drive. We want that moment. But are we faithful in the little things, in the hidden things? God, I want to lead people to Christ. Well, I mean, did you pray for anybody that doesn't know Christ? Well, no. God, I want to teach people about the Bible. Well, do you know anything about the Bible? Well, no. We got to be faithful in the little things, right? And they're not little, they're huge. But let me move on to the specifics. So generally if we follow Christ, we have this call to salvation, and then that includes a whole lot of other things. What about specifically? Does God speak to the hundreds of us in here today, like specifically? I'll say this, God has a specific call to all Christ followers. I mean, now Moses' specific call is not yours. His is already done. This was Moses' specific call. You go to Pharaoh and deliver my people. That was Moses' call. Aren't you glad that one's taken already, right? I mean, that was very specific, but I think he has specific tasks for us, purposes for us. It's Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, so I did some reading on him this weekend, and here's some numbers that were interesting to me about Martin Luther King. First of all, he was a brilliant guy. He was raised in an upper middle class Atlanta, the Auburn neighborhood that he was in. It's called basically the kind of the Southern Wall Street is what it was referred to as. He graduated high school when he was 15. He graduated college when he was 19. He graduated seminary when he was 22. Got married at 24. But at 26, there was some call that happened in his life that was a very important deal. When you read all the histories, this little thing seems like a little thing, but I'm telling you, it leads to the next things. He got married in 1953. He was 24 years old, and then in 53. Then he and his wife moved to Montgomery, Alabama, and became the pastoring family for Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dexter Avenue. I had not ever heard of, I'd never lived in Montgomery, right? And in the fall of 1955, he's 26 years old. I mean, from someone who's more than twice that age, this seems very young to me. In the fall of that year, the Montgomery Improvement Association asked him to become their leader, their president. Nobody had ever heard of the Montgomery Improvement Association. But they thought, this guy, he's super educated, he's super smart, he's not from Montgomery, so nobody has a bone to pick with him, and maybe he'll be respected. He was educated, in very high circles in the North, and, he comes from a good family and all this kind of stuff. Let's get him to be our president. Maybe the city of Montgomery will listen to us, because they were going to boycott that year the public busing in Montgomery that segregated blacks and whites. And you read about the Rosa Parks, and you read about all the other things that happened in Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, which are amazing. But it kind of comes back to this little invitation to be the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, of which you and I have never heard, probably. We're trying to answer the question, does God have a specific call on individuals' lives? See, because we would put Martin Luther King Jr. probably in a category like Moses. Well, of course he had a specific call to Moses. Of course he had a specific call to Martin Luther King Jr. Of course he had a blah, blah, blah. But does he have a specific call to you? For me, I actually got a call to ministry. I was minding my own business in a Baptist church about 2 miles from here, over on the States Drive. It's now First Baptist Woodway, and they've moved way out. It was still First Baptist Wood. That used to be Woodway. I was in a Sunday school class with 250-ish college students. I was a sophomore. It was 1987. And in the middle of just a worship song, I heard God say, I want you to be my minister. And I was like a hospital administration major. I was a business major. I was like, what? And I'm like, what? I want you to be my minister. Those are the words I heard. I still remember them today. 30-something years later, I still remember those words. And that just completely changed my life in another way. I went out and I said, okay, God, here's the deal. I changed my major and all that kind of stuff. I said, yes. As long as you don't put me in a Methodist church, because I grew up in a Methodist church in Georgia and I was not a Christian. So at the end of my college career, I say career as if I earned money. I actually paid money for that. But I couldn't find a job. There was a handwritten note in Tidwell Bible Building in the basement on the little pegboard, and there was a handwritten note looking for a youth minister, and I picked it up and I called, and I went out to a place called Mahia, Texas. Some of you know where that is. And I was hired there at First United Methodist Church of Mahia, Texas, to be their youth minister by a guy named Stephen Ramsdale, who interviewed me, and he gave me my first job ever. And I did that for a year, and I thought, man, I'm so glad that's over. Whew. I don't know. Y'all done youth ministry? I mean, I love youth, but man, I was ready for. And I'm sitting in my little office, and I have a stack, literally a stack of letters, about 100 letters, one-page letters to raise money. I was going to go be a church planter in Venezuela. And they're on my desk, and I was fixing to address them. And one of the parents of our youth group came in, and he had 4 children in the youth group. He says, you can't leave. I said, oh, I'm out of here, buddy. No, you can't leave. And we've never had a youth minister who taught our kids about the Bible and stuff like that. You can't leave. And he leaves my office like, yeah. And he shut the door, and I thought, just this weird, what are you doing, God? I got a plan here, And all of a sudden I'm feeling unsettled, and I called some people and said, y'all pray with me because I don't know. And, I'm probably giving you too much information here. But in the end of that thing, I stayed for another year, and that's when I got to be really good friends with this woman named Beth Farron, who's now my wife. And that just begins me on, there's these little things. Does God specifically call us? And I'm telling you, he does. I'm telling you, he does. Jacob and Jennifer are sitting in here today. And I told him I was going to talk about it. I told Jacob, Jennifer, if he didn't tell you, I'm so sorry. But, about 3 years ago, I may have the time frame a little weird, but they said, we feel like God's calling us to, foster children. Wow. And just watching you guys foster children and believe that God is calling you, that has been an amazing thing on the outside. I can't even imagine what it is on the inside. We got a family in our church that 2.5 years ago, they called and said, can we meet with you? And I said, sure. I don't even know who you are. They weren't in our church. They said, we go to this other church out here. We're 80-something years old. So they were like Moses' prime age, right? And they said, and God is calling us to renew. I was like, what? What? He goes, yeah, God just said we need to be part of that. And I go, I don't even know what I guess we had the name renew at that point. I didn't know I said, we don't know how it's going to go. They said, we just think that God is calling us to be part of that. And, I've had people say, God is calling me to host a community group. I don't want to be the leader, but I want to host one in our house. That's my, and you're like, wow. I'm just giving you examples of people that I know where God has called them. Last weekend, we were at a retreat for our youth at Latham Springs Camp. A great retreat. And I just tell you that you don't have a great retreat if you don't have 20, 30, 40 adults who feel called to go and spend a weekend camping out with a bunch of youth. And to hang out with them and to eat youth food and to sing youth songs and to smell like a youth at the end of that whole thing. You don't have it unless our youth smell great. They really smell great, though. But you know what I'm saying? There are people out there, they're not out there because nobody, if you know Kathy Schneider, she can't guilt anybody in anything. She doesn't have that one, But they felt called. So the question for us is, how do we listen better, okay? And I'm going to end this real fast because I'm always out of time. Here's a fill in the blank. God still speaks to his people in at least 4 ways. You know these ways. God speaks through his word. You don't have to say, man, I'm in this new business and it would be so easy for me to embezzle money. God, what do you think? Should I embezzle money? Hey, he didn't have to speak to you audibly about that. You know, you sit and go, man, I love her so much, and, I know we're not married, and maybe we shouldn't, but we're going to, because, if it just feels right, and it's love and all this stuff, and you go, hey, you don't have to ask God about that. It's so clear. You just read. So God still speaks through His Word, but He also speaks through godly people. I hope you have godly people in your life. That when you're wondering, maybe God's saying something. I mean, when that parent came and said, you can't leave, I called 3 people that I knew were close to God. I said, listen for me, pray for me, tell me what you hear. And they did. God speaks to us through visions and dreams. This morning, 7 a.m. this morning, I get a text. I never get texts at 7 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Don't you know I'm a preacher? And this guy from out of town texts me and says, man, I just had the craziest dream last night. It was you and me, and it was just the sweetest time in the Lord, and I don't know what it's about, but I know it's from God, and I'm just going to send it to you. I was like, oh, man, you have no idea how much I needed to hear that today, And then this 4th way is this still small voice, this Holy Spirit. Sometimes you just know. That's the hardest thing to explain to others. It's one thing to go, well, it says right here in the book of Second Opinions, blah, 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 blah. But when you tell somebody, the still small voice of God, and then you're like, whoa, okay. The question is, are you making excuses to God? That's what Moses was doing. I mean, maybe God's calling you, I don't know, to be baptized. And you go, I don't know, God. I'm an adult after all. People would look at me weird. No, they won't. You making excuses? Maybe you've been dancing all around this idea of giving your life completely to Christ, and you're just, I don't know, and I don't know. We talk about giving some here, and you're, maybe I should give. You making excuses? God calls each of us to be obedient. You want a call on your life? It's a call to obedience. God's not worried about your ability. God's looking at your availability. There's certainly way more gifted people out there than the ones that you see in front of you. I guarantee it. But for some reason, we're just available. The question for us is, will you trust God with your life? Will you trust Him? Moses trusted Him. Why? Because after all the excuses, Moses left. So the worship team's going to come back up here, and I'm going to finish this out. Let me just say a couple fast things. Spiritual maturity, you want to know if you're spiritually mature or not? Measure the speed with which you obey God. A lot of us obey God once we get caught. A lot of us obey God once our life finally does fall apart. Then we start to obey God. Spiritual maturity is revealed in our immediate obedience. Some of you today, maybe the Holy Spirit said, you need to call that person. You need to make that right. You need to follow through on that. I don't know. But when you trust God, you begin to see Him do miracles. And that's next week's message. But you begin to see Him do the things that are supernatural, that are outside the natural. And Moses, I want you to hear this, almost missed it. Moses, that guy, the all-star, almost missed it. Top 3 in the Bible, Moses, almost missed it. He was on the point of walking out the door on God. He almost missed it. So just know that you and I, we can just about miss it. A group of us coming up on 3 years ago felt like God was calling us to start a church, which none of us had ever done that before. And people are like, well, how did you know? We go, I don't know that we knew, but we just, and just a series of miraculous things, and here we are. We can't believe where we are. We see so much fruit in spite of a pandemic happening at Renew Church, and it's just one of those amazing stories that we have a book coming out, I think sometime this spring. It's just this amazing thing. But I'll tell you that I don't want to miss anything that God's doing. I'm reading my Oswald Chambers this year. He says this about the call of God on the January 14th. He says, the call of God is not for the special few, it's for everyone. Whether or not I hear God's call depends on my disposition. Many are called, few are chosen. That means that few prove themselves to be the chosen one. The chosen ones are those who have come into a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, whereby their disposition has been altered, their ears unstopped, and they hear the still small voice questioning all the time, who will go for us? Moses was 80. Just about missed it. You don't have to miss it. Revelation 3:20, Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and I knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I'll come in." If that's your heart cry today, follow through. God still calls his people to great things. Lord, have your way, we pray, in our midst.